Welcome to Cal's Cinema. This is Season 1 and 2 of The Rings of Power. Before I get into this review, bear in mind that I came to watch The Rings of Power as both a fan of the Peter Jackson films and later of the books by Tolkien. That said, I will try and stay fair and give credit where credit is due to the Amazon-produced series. No doubt I will have to be reminding myself of that at the time of making this video. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started.
I'm going on an adventure!
So, where do we start? Well, at the beginning would probably be best. No, not with "in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," but way back with the announcement of Rings, as I'll be referring to the series from here on in. It was way back in 2017, that's depressing to think about, 2017 that Amazon secured the rights to some but not all of Tolkien's works. Important distinction there, for a whopping $250 million. What followed was further press releases and the eventual announcement that the first season would cost all in all $1 billion to produce. Whether the Dark Lord base host is really that much of a fan, or that Amazon simply thought they could turn a substantial profit on their investment, I guess we'll never know.
Fair enough.
Some fans were naturally skeptical on how Tolkien's writings would be adapted, given how some streaming services' tentpole shows have turned out. The Witcher, for example, famously had behind-the-scenes drama with writers apparently having a disregard for the source material. Fans have never been strangers to being let down with their favourite series, even going as far back as the calamity that was the final season of Game of Thrones. But some fans, and also more casual potential viewers alike, were still hopeful that Rings would turn out differently. And no doubt, while I personally enjoyed the Hobbit trilogy as a whole, there was still a somewhat sour taste from the end of the Jackson era, concluding with a 368-page children's book being split over 3 separate 2-hour-long plus movies, with newly invented characters and a shoehorned interspecies romance. But that's a whole other story which you can look into for yourself. Not that those mistakes can't be repeated. Anyway, it's fair to say that some were ready and hungry to go back to Middle-earth, with new faces and writers and even a different era and new unseen lands in Arda itself to look forward to. And that hype, or dread, depending on who you were, built and built until the 2nd of September 2022. Episode 1 was available to watch, and the opening scenes of the prologue began. And as I saw Morgoth stealing the light of the trees in Valinor, and the eagles fighting fell beasts in slow motion, Finrod slaying orcs, I'll confess, I thought it was off to a pretty good start.
It ain't bad.
And I bet a lot of fans felt the same way. Amazon had clearly pumped a lot into this opening epilogue. It looked great, the story was pretty much as I remembered. Surely, this was a sign of good things to come.
But they were all of them deceived.
Look, I'll just come out and say what won't be a massive shock to anyone. There's no point in pretending I'm a fan of what Rings has done, and I'll try to explain why that is the best I can, covering the 2 seasons as a whole for the rest of this already overlong video. So, let's get into what's good and what's not so good about the Rings of Power, including spoilers from here on out, and weirdly, even eventual spoilers, as in things that are yet to happen on the show, but that we know will, if that makes sense. I hinted at this earlier, but one of the most disconcerting aspects of Rings of Power is the condensing and even overlapping of timelines. Now, this may not be important to someone who isn't interested in the books or is only interested in picking up a new series, but I can only speak for myself when making these reviews, and Rings is no exception. While I understand that having, say, 1500 years pass between events isn't great for the format of a TV series, I do wonder if it could have been pulled off more successfully than the sometimes rushed pace that Rings presents these as. Just as an example, Gandalf, or the Stranger as he was introduced, major shocker in that reveal by the way, well, he is canonically known to arrive in Middle-earth around the year 1000 in the Third Age. The forging of the Rings of Power meanwhile occurred in the Second Age around the year 1590. This places literally thousands of years between the events, but in the show they are presented as running almost concurrently for the sake of condensing the plotline. It's jarring right from the first episode, to say the least. Timelines covered, more on the story later on. Somewhere where Rings excels is its casting. While there have been complaints about Morfydd Clark's portrayal of a younger, angrier Galadriel, I find it actually to be fitting for the setting that Amazon are placing her in. After 2 seasons and 16 episodes, Galadriel's cranky act does get tiresome, especially for a race that's known for their ethereal quality, but Clark does the best with what she's been given by the writers. The fact that the only time the writers allow Galadriel to show any other emotion is when she's with Halbrand is unfortunate, seeing as Morfydd is more than capable of playing beyond pouts and scowls.
It is only natural to feel conflicted.
Conflicted?
Another highlight has been Celebrimbor, the smith who is greeted by Bearer of Gifts Anatar. Charles Edwards plays the elf with the believability of someone who has been gaslighted and manipulated into doing what they think is right. Edwards subtly portrays the flipping back and forth between his suspicion of Anatar and being caught up in his glamour. Celebrimbor's eventual discovery of the truth and breakdown were a perfect end for Edwards' role on the show.
It must be nearly noontide. One used to hear the kingfishers flying to the river. It is a pity how you have silenced them.
Props also go to the actors behind. The only interesting person in the entire island of Numenor, Lord Pharazôn, Prince Durin and Disa, that is when she's not trying to cause a cave-in by screaming at rocks, and Middle-earth's own MILF Bronwyn. R.I.P. You will not be forgotten.
You bring her back! You bring her back!
But, without a doubt, the man who single-handedly carries this entire production on his shoulders is... No, not those guys. It's Charlie Vickers. Whether he's Halbrand or Anatar, or a puddle of venom symbiote goo on a cave floor, Vickers' portrayal has been the strongest reason for me to tune in week after week, after snoring through scene after scene of Harfoot caravan and desert nonsense, or Numenor flip-flopping on election day. Besides scenes with the dwarves, Sauron's plot is possibly the only other compelling story on the show, which is insane given the source material. Despite the unnecessarily complicated invention of the journey of Halbrand to Anatar and beyond the forging of the Nine, I can safely say that this guy, not you, this guy has become my headcanon Sauron.
The pain almost became a reward. Became a game. A contest. To see whose will was the mightier.
But after all that, you would still choose to inflict the same pain upon me.
No. You chose it. Not I. And since you forced me to torment you to bring them into being, I am but a victim of your obstinance. And you, the true author of your own torment.
I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect.
Now that we've covered what's good about Rings, let's cover more of the bad. While the production value starts off strong in those earlier scenes, it soon becomes clear that the budget did not cover the rest of the show. Resprayed toy armor aside, Rings has an undeniable feel of green screen off a lot of the scenes. This is understandable given the scale and fantasy nature of the show, but when compared to real-world locations used in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, for example, the difference in the beauty between the two is plain to see, and this use of green screen has only increased since the already over-rendered scenes in the Hobbit films.
Just tell me what happens, and then I'll try and do it without you telling me.
And when it comes to what's on screen, Middle-earth also feels bizarrely empty. The Southlands, for example, feels like it has maybe 200 people living in it. Our Menelaus, the capital of Numenor, feels like one small town, and there is never more than a handful of elves on the screen at any time. The main glaring issue with the Rings of Power is unfortunately the writing, so much so that I couldn't start to cover it all. Whether they're inventing MacGuffins in the form of a blood-powered sword that is actually a key to an ancient dam which then floods and also starts up a volcano, or having pivotal plot points rest on meaningless things, such as when Círdan decides, nah, These rings are actually a really good thing because that fish hit my boat. Characters' motivations and emotions often seem to serve the plot rather than cause it. The Rings of Power writers feel like they are daisy-chaining the big things, the events that need to happen in the story together by any means possible, and they aren't afraid to disregard their own writing either. Eru Iluvatar, dammit, if Sauron can make 5 soldiers simultaneously stab each other with Jedi mind powers, then he could have stopped Galadriel falling off that cliff and taking Nenya with her.
We are not alike. We never were. It was just another of your illusions.
Not all of it.
Often the dialogue is cringeworthy with loose metaphor after metaphor thrown in for a Middle-earth effect, but in reality it does nothing but show the thoughtlessness that it was written with. So, what's the verdict on The Rings of Power? Well, while it has a stellar cast and tackles some grand-scale fantasy scenes well, Rings of Power lacks substance behind its less than glossy exterior. The production, from costumes to sets to extras, is sometimes surprisingly poor for a show with such a high budget. Newly invented characters and plots fleshing out thousands of years of concurrent stories can't save the quality of the writing, and on the whole, it doesn't feel as crafted as lovingly as something like the original trilogy, or even the cash grab one movie spun into a trilogy of The Hobbit. Scoring the 2 seasons individually seems fairest, but there won't be a vast difference between the two. Rings of Power Season 1 scores a 5.5 and Season 2 scores a 5.8 out of 10. What have you thought so far about Rings of Power? Do you think I was unfair to call out the overlapping of ages? Or is there something that I missed across the 2 seasons that really pissed you off? You can let me know, and be sure to like and subscribe for more, and come back again to Cal's Cinema.